I was in rehab for, well, the drugs that I used, and I used like fentanyl, which is like IV drug addicts, so I like used a needle, and I did a lot of cocaine and some meth here and there, and I drank a lot, and so my drug use, and I did a lot of like prescription pills, and so my drug use and my alcohol use kind of like landed me into rehab.
Gabby, I'm looking at you. These are very dangerous drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Are you lucky to be here?
Oh yeah, I am very lucky. I've had like 13 overdoses in the past 4 years of doing drugs, and so I think towards like the last year of my using, I probably went through over half of those overdoses in 1 year, and it was very close to death very many times.
Gabby, my heart just skipped a beat. Like, I'm scared listening to
Mm-hmm.
you. Can you tell me about some of those 13 overdoses, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so my first overdose, I had just started using drugs and I was 12 years old, and I had just moved to New York by myself, and I was moving there for ballet boarding school, and so I was surrounded by everyone who was so much older than me. Everyone was like 18 and up, and I was 13, just turned 13, and people started talking about how they do coke to like stay awake and like to dance longer and to like stay thinner, and I kind of was just like, this sounds like a good idea for me because I am under a lot of pressure right now and I need to be able to work my best. Like, this is my passion, I need to be as good as possible. And so I started using cocaine, and I remember I was in my dorm room and we were all just kind of drinking and doing coke and like smoking weed, and I did a line of coke, and it was laced with something in it. I have no idea what it was, but I just remember like waking up and my friend was like giving me CPR, and she like Narcaned me, but I wasn't on opiates, so it didn't really like work very well, but I ended up being fine, and I like woke up in the hospital the next morning, and it was like a whole ordeal, but I left and went back to class and just continued my drug use the same as normal.
Tell me how you progressed to each drug. So that was coke. Did you continue using coke?
I continued using coke. My first drug was oxys, and those were my dad's prescription pills.
How did you start using Oxycontin?
Well, my dad died when I was 12.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and so it was out of curiosity. My mom had also passed away when I was 9, and both of them were drug addicts, and they both died of a drug overdose. And so I was kind of like using drugs out of the curiosity of like, what is so good about drugs that my parents would choose drugs over me. And so I started using my dad's oxys, and then it kind of like went from oxys to like hydros to perks, and eventually got into stimulants like cocaine and meth. And then I just kind of went from one type of drug to another, and eventually at the end of my drug use, I was like shooting up with a needle like on the side of the street just to like get around and like live my day and just like be okay, because that was the only like coping mechanism that I knew.
How did you get access to these drugs, Gabby?
Well, it kind of like once you enter the drug world, it's very like you find one person and then they connect you with someone else, and it's like this whole new world that like you didn't even know existed. And so I found one person in my dorm room in New York, and I was like, hey, I have a bottle of oxys, like can I trade you some oxys for some coke? And she like kind of introduced me to this whole world. And like nowadays with like Snapchat and all that, like you can buy drugs off Snapchat, like you meet up with people, and like it's one thing leads to another. And I eventually started like seeing people who were like drug dealers, and they'd always get arrested, and I'd move on to the next and just continue like doing whatever I needed to do to get high and like chasing that high.
How did you get involved with fentanyl?
Well, my mom's drug of choice was fentanyl, and so I always knew how bad and dangerous it was. But once you get to a certain extent and you're using it, like doesn't really matter. And so I always told myself like I'm never doing heroin, I'm never touching that, and I never did. And even though fentanyl is worse than heroin, it didn't really matter in my mind. I had gotten a perk that was laced with fentanyl, and it was the best perk that I had ever taken in my mind, and I was just like, okay, well, this isn't a real perk, this is fentanyl, so let's try fentanyl. And so I just kind of like got into that world of using fentanyl. And I started with just snorting it, and eventually led to like a needle in my arm.
How old were you when you started using fentanyl?
I was 14.
At what point did you say enough was enough and you entered rehab, or did someone else tell you that?
I think it was someone else. It was my aunt that told me enough was enough, but I never really I knew that it was enough like years before. I knew from like age like 14, the day I turned 14, I was like, I'm tired of this. Like, I've been doing this for 2 years. I don't want to keep doing this, but I had to like survive, and that was the only way I knew how to survive, because like the pain of like all of my past childhood trauma was just too overbearing for me to handle. And so I remember I came home from my friend's house, and I had been at her house for like 3 days, and I went on this like 3-day bender, and I came home. I had lost my phone. I was wearing someone else's clothes, lost my shoes, lost like almost everything I brought with me to my friend's house. And my aunt had all of my stuff packed in suitcases. And she told me, you have 2 hours to decide whether you want to go live with your grandmother or live on the streets or do whatever you want, or you can go to rehab. And I'm gonna give you 2 hours to decide that. And I just kind of sat there for 2 hours, like trying to call my friends off my computer, trying to text them, like trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. And when the 2 hours was up, I was just like, okay, I guess I'll go to rehab. Like, I don't really have any other choice. And so I entered detox with like kind of a resentment. I was like, I don't want to be here. I don't have a drug problem. Well, I do have a drug problem, but I don't care, and I don't want to do anything about it. And then once I detoxed, it was like the worst pain anyone could imagine, like bugs in my skin, like itching on my arms. But I got to rehab, and I went to Caron in Pennsylvania, and it was like the most amazing place ever, and I loved it from the second I got there. And it changed my life completely. I met so many wonderful people, and the staff there is just incredible. And like, we had all these activities. We went hiking, we went to the gym, we went swimming, like we did all of these fun things, and at the same time we were like healing our like sad inner child. And so when I got back, I just had a completely different mindset about like who I am and what I want to be in the world. And so now I'm sober and in recovery.
How long have you been sober?
I'm gonna be 11 months sober this month.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You've been through so much. Like, I cannot even believe it. 11 months sober. And so, and you've been through more than most adults have been through. And so, talking to you, what do parents like myself need to know about signs to look for?
I think like what I would say to parents is like the detachment in your child when they go from kind of like being your friend and hanging out with you and wanting to be with you to completely isolating themselves or spending all of their time with their friends. And I feel like that's a very like in between spot, because like once you start becoming a teenager, you start hanging out with your friends more, but at the same time you start kind of like testing the water and like seeing what you can get away with and seeing like what is out there in the world and trying to become your own person. But it gets to a point where I think parents don't realize like what their kids are actually doing. And so like just being in touch with your kids and like knowing where they're going. Like right now I have very open communication with my aunt, where I'm going, what I'm doing, when I'll be home, like what I'm spending my money on. And it's like, it sounds like a lot, but it's super easy. Before I go somewhere, I just text my aunt like, hey, I'm going to this place and I'm seeing this person and I'll be home by this time. And the safety of like knowing where your child is and what they're doing and who they're with is like very reassuring. And I think that that's some things that kids don't like, is like being able to track your kid or know where they're going. But I think it's one of like the most important things, because like when I was using drugs, I was like lying about where I was going, and my aunt did not have my location, but now I tell her where I'm going, and she has my location to reassure her.
Track your kids, everybody. Hey, this light went out, Dennis. Do we need to do anything about that?
It's just on you, but I think this light is dead.
I didn't know there was another battery to do. I just have a couple more questions and then.
Nope.
Okay. If you had to tell, so we have advice for parents. What about kids thinking about trying? You know, I just want to smoke a joint. I just want to try this one drug. What's the danger of that, Gabby?
I go both ways in this like question, because I really don't think there's anything wrong with like experimenting with drugs, as long as like you are in touch with your parents. Like, I remember when I first moved in with my aunt, she was like, I know you're going to experiment with drugs. It's just you can't go past a certain point. And I went past that point. And so the obsessive, like kind of addictive behaviors is something I think parents don't see in their children all the time. But like when you start using drugs, like say I just wanted to smoke a little weed, I think that's like, so I want to smoke weed, but to what extent? Is it going to go from weed to another drug, to another drug, to another drug, and then I can't get off any drugs? Or is it just, I'm going to smoke some weed, or I'm going to drink at a party once or twice? And I think for kids, like nowadays, it's really hard to be able to tell the difference. And I think it's like a good kind of test to see like, oh, I'm going to start trying drugs, but let's stay in touch, let's be smart, let's like not go out and put myself in dangerous situations or try things that are actually very dangerous for you, because I personally don't think weed is super dangerous, but it also, like, if you're past the age or under the age of 25, like your brain is still developing, and so I think there is like a limit to that kind of experimentation.
Gabby, why did you agree to talk to me about your drug use? Why is it important for you to raise awareness about teen drug use?
I think it's really important for me to raise awareness for teen drug use, just because like this is a very like large epidemic going on in the world, and it started out with like older people, like adults, and now it's going to like our young like children of the world. And like I started using drugs at 12, and I know people who started using drugs at even younger ages, like 8, 9, and 10, which is like insane to me. My little brother, he just turned 10, and like the thought of him like going out and using drugs right now like is terrifying, and I could never imagine that for him. And so I also like want to raise awareness for not only teens but like adults using drugs and kids who have parents who use drugs, because my parents used drugs and they both died of an overdose. And so just raising that awareness and making sure people know like how badly this affects people, and that this is like a life or death disease.
I'm sorry your parents died. That must be so painful. You turned to drugs to drown out your pain. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with your pain now?
Well, now I go to therapy, and I've been going to therapy since I was 6, but I never like participated or like put any of my effort into it. I just kind of sat there. But now I deal with my like pain and trauma through my coping mechanisms, and like focusing on what's next and focusing on like just for today, like what am I doing in this moment, in this second. I don't need to think about like what I'm doing tomorrow or what I'm doing like 10 minutes from now, but just focusing on myself and right now. And that's like what really has helped me through, because like I could never have imagined myself at 11 months sober like 11 months ago, but I did it just for today, and now I'm here.
How about for kids watching, for teens watching? Oh, SD card is full. Why doesn't it just go to the next caller?
Well, it's GoPro, only has one card.
Sorry, Gabby.
Oh, you're good.
This is literally one more question for Gabby.
Why won't you open? Power off, power on. Sorry. I've never filled one of these cards up. They're huge.
Yeah, me neither. Maybe there was already stuff on it.
Oh yeah, there's tons of stuff
Oh,
on it.
that's
As I
why.
said, I've never filled it up, even with tons of stuff on it.
It wasn't a clean card.
It won't power on.
Sorry, Gabby.
Oh, you're good.
And then right after this, he'll just get some shots of us talking. What class are you going back to?
Right now I'm working on like my therapy homework, and so I'm just like working on my personal computer.
Okay. So my final question to you is, what advice for the teens watching who are thinking about doing drugs or maybe even doing drugs right now? What advice do you have for them?
I would say like it's very simple, like black and white, from when drugs go from being something that's fun and you do occasionally to something that you are craving and needing and wanting and are dependent on, and you have like a physical and mental addiction to them. And so I would tell like teens who are using drugs or thinking about using drugs to really like tread lightly on what you're doing, because it is very dangerous, and especially in Austin right now, like I've heard so many people overdosing. And one of my friends, she texted me and she was like, I had just used Coke for the first time and it was laced with fentanyl. And there are so many people who are dying today in Austin because of this like epidemic, and everything that's going around is laced right now. And so just really just thinking before you do, and thinking about not only yourself but your family and your friends, and like, is it worth it?
You said something scary to me. You said you would have gone to McAllen High School, and you said that McAllen was just well known for being a drug school. Can you explain that further?
Yeah, so I am zoned from McCallum. I went to Austin High for a year, but it was online during COVID, so I never went in person. But everyone at McCallum does drugs, sells drugs. Like, it is a huge place for drugs, and everyone there, you walk into the school and it smells like weed. You walk into a bathroom and someone is smoking or doing lines of Coke. It's insane. Like, it's like that at Austin High too, and it's really sad to see like an entire school of young, like bright children just wasting their day getting high and going to class and not learning anything.
I mean, you just did not want to be part of that.
Not at all. And I knew like if I went to McCallum, there was no way that I would stay sober.
I was going to say, could you, like, what's the danger of you going?
Yeah.
You know for a fact you would fall right back.
Oh yeah. I think now that I have like sober time, like clean time behind me, I could definitely stay sober there now. But I think like if straight out of rehab, if I went to McCallum, there's like a 99.9% chance I would have relapsed.
Very good. And maybe I can ask your aunt this. Are there pictures that perhaps you can share with us when you were 12, or like when you went to New York, like in that ballet school, that can help us tell like a chronological story of you? Like,
Yeah.
and maybe how many times did you go to the hospital when you overdosed?
I didn't really go to the hospital that often, and when I did, I like kind of wedged my way around it so that like none of my like guardians at the time would like know that I was in the hospital.
How did you get away? How did you
It
get away
was
with
a
that?
very complicated like process. I had like a fake ID, and so I bought like a very realistic one, and it went through just so that they could get my name into the system, and then I would leave before they could do anything else.
Then I wonder maybe like when you enter the ballet, like a picture then, and then maybe other pictures, and then we can just track 12, 13, 14, maybe just that period.
Yeah.
And that would be helpful. And anything else I forgot to ask you that you want to tell everyone as part of your story?
I don't really think there's anything else other than like remembering that people care about you at all times. Like, I know in my addiction, I didn't think anyone would care about me. I thought I could just fall off the face of the earth and it wouldn't matter. But there were so many people who were just scared to death of losing me, and I didn't see it. And it was the drugs like clouding my system, clouding my brain and my vision. But remembering how loved you are, remembering that there's people out there that want to help you, and that like this is something that you can do for yourself, and that the AA and NA program is always like there for any addict in need.
Thank you, Gabby. You're so brave to tell us that all.